So Marc Lamont Hill was fired by CNN because he gave a speech at the UN standing in solidarity with Palestinians. So I don't want to, go through this whole segment just talking about what he said. I'm going to show you what he said. I'm going to show you probably the key portions of what he said. His speech is a little bit longer than this, but at least you'll get the gist of the sentiment of what he was trying to put out there. So take a look at this, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
While the Universal Declaration for Human Rights says that all people are, quote, born free and equal in dignity and rights, the Israeli nation state continues to restrict freedom and undermine equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel, as well as those in the West Bank and Gaza. At the current moment, there are more than 60 Israeli laws that deny Palestinians access to full citizenship rights, simply because they're not Jewish. From housing to education to family reunification, it is clear that any freedoms naturally endowed to all human beings are actively being stripped away from Palestinians through Israeli statecraft. While human rights promises the right to life, liberty, and security of person, Palestinians continue to live under the threat of random violence by Israeli military and police, disproportionate violence within the West Bank and Gaza, unprompted violence in the face of peaceful protest, and misdirected violence by an Israeli state that systematically fails to distinguish between civilians and combatants. While the Universal Declaration for Human Rights protects us against torture and cruel and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, Palestinians continue to be physically and psychologically tortured by the Israeli criminal justice system. As we speak, the conditions on the ground for Palestinian people are worsening. In recent decades, the Israeli government has moved further and further to the right, normalizing settler colonialism and its accompanying logics of denial, destruction, displacement, and death. Despite international condemnation, settlement expansion has continued. At the same time, home demolitions and state-enforced displacement continues to uproot Palestinian communities. For Gazans, the 11-year Israeli and Egyptian blockade by land, air, and sea has created the largest open-air prison in the world. With only 4% potable water, electricity access that is limited to 4 hours per day, 50% unemployment, and the looming threat of Israeli bombs, Gaza continues to constitute one of the most pressing humanitarian crises of the current moment. In the West Bank, conditions are not much better. Unemployment is generally around 18%, with frequent loss of income due to Israeli military closures, making it impossible for Palestinian workers to get access to jobs. Settlements and the extra land allocated for them, as well as closed military zones and other restrictions, make it impossible for Palestinian towns to grow. And in the midst of it all, Prime Minister Netanyahu's administration has become increasingly indifferent to critique, censure, or even scorn from the international community for its practices. Perhaps the most glaring example of this indifference, as well as the urgency of the current moment, is the recently passed nation-state law. Through this basic law, the Israeli state has officially rejected Arabic as an official state language. It has described settlement expansion both inside and outside of the Green Line as a national value, and it has reinforced the fact that Israel is not a state of all of its citizens. As an American, I am embarrassed that my tax dollars contribute to this reality. Solidarity from the international community demands that we embrace boycotts, divestment, and sanctions as a critical means by which to hold Israel accountable for its treatment of Palestinian people. This movement, which emerges out of the overwhelming majority of Palestinian civil society, offers a nonviolent means by which to demand a return to the pre-67 borders, full rights for Palestinian citizens, and the right of return as dictated by international law. If we are standing in solidarity with Palestinian people, we must recognize the right of an occupied people to defend itself. We must prioritize peace. But we must not romanticize or fetishize it. We must advocate and promote nonviolence at every opportunity, but we cannot endorse a narrow politics of respectability that shames Palestinians for resisting, for refusing to do nothing in the face of state violence and ethnic cleansing. So as we stand here on the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the tragic commemoration of the Nakba, we have an opportunity to not just offer solidarity in words, but to commit to political action, grassroots action, local action, and international action that will give us what justice requires. And that is a free Palestine from the river to the sea. Thank you for your time.
What a raging anti-Semite. Ugh, gross. I mean, he obviously hates all Jews, and he thinks Jews are inferior. He was fired by CNN, and they literally argued, or at least the implication was, that's unacceptable because it's anti-Semitic. What? How? How did you get anti-Semite from that? So he went to Twitter after he was fired, and he explained himself further. He said, "In my speech, I talked about the need to return to the pre-1967 borders, to give rights to Palestinian citizens of Israel, and to allow right of return. No part of this is a call to destroy Israel. It's absurd on its face. It's also absurd and illogical to suggest that a speech that explicitly called for redrawing borders and granting full citizenship for Palestinians in Israel was also calling for its destruction. People either didn't listen to the speech or they're being dishonest. My reference to river to the sea was not a call to destroy anything or anyone. It was a call for justice, both in Israel and in the West Bank/Gaza. The speech very clearly and specifically said those things. No amount of debate will change what I actually said or what I meant." Now, he has since come out and said, "I apologize if people interpreted my from the river to the sea thing in the wrong way, because people were arguing, hey man, what are you doing? That's a phrase that Hamas uses. Do you agree with Hamas? Is that what it is? Do you agree with Hamas? Do you hate all Jews? Are you trying to totally destroy Israel?" And listen, I watched his entire speech. You saw probably about half of it there, but I saw his entire speech. I read all of his tweets on it, and it's just a flat-out smear against him. That's my takeaway. It's a flat-out smear. Now, it's perfectly valid if you want to disagree with Marc Lamont Hill's position on Israel. So what he seems to be saying, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, or if some of you interpret it a different way, you can tell me, and I'll take it under advisement. But it seems to me like what he was saying is, so he wants a one-state solution, like a binational one-state solution. But the 1967 borders would be Israel, and then also at the same time, Palestinians who were kicked off of their land by Israel get to go back into Israel, but that is still Israel. And then I guess the other area beyond the 1967 borders would be Palestine. And so I guess that would be, you have an Israel and you have a Palestine, but in Israel, you also have the Palestinian citizens who get full citizenship, equal rights, and get to go back to basically their homeland. I guess that's what his position is. Now, I was a little confused by that, because when I thought of a one-state solution, and many people advocate for a one-state solution in Israel-Palestine because it looks like the two-state solution is dead, I thought that would mean that everything becomes Israel-Palestine, not like you have an Israel and you have a Palestine and Palestinians get to go back to their homeland in Israel. I thought that a one-state solution was everything becomes Israel-Palestine, and it's one nation, and it's a democratic state where everybody gets full citizenship. That's what I thought it was. So I'm not exactly sure how the 1967 borders idea meshes with a one-state solution, but that could just be because I'm not educated enough on the issue, and Marc Lamont Hill is significantly more educated on it than I am. So, but again, point is, you can disagree with him and say, no, Marc Lamont Hill, I still believe in the two-state solution, which is 1967 borders, that's where Israel is, and then the rest is Palestine, and, they're your two states, and that's the end of it, and not necessarily a right of return, but you do have a Palestinian state. Some people believe in that as a two-state solution. Some people believe in the one-state solution as everything is Israel-Palestine and one democratic nation where everybody has equal rights. He seems to be doing like a mix of those two ideas, at least as far as I can tell. So you could disagree with him, but in no way, shape, or form is he saying, I don't like Jews, I hate Jews, we should destroy Israel, people should leave Israel. No, he's very clearly saying, I believe in equality for all people, I believe in human rights for all people, and Palestinians are being deprived of their human rights, and we need to make sure that we stand in solidarity with Palestinians and get them their rights back. So he spoke about literally unemployment, jobs, settlements, colonialism, BDS, which again, people say that there's literally an argument from corporate Democrats and Republicans that is anti-Semitic. But that's beyond ridiculous because on its face, it's not. All they're saying is, hey, let's apply economic pressure, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions on Israel so that we get human rights for Palestinians. I mean, that's literally what worked in apartheid South Africa, and that's what is now being tried on Israel. And just so you know, it's working. We covered a story from a few years back, 20 or 25%, maybe even up to 30% of the businesses that were in the occupied territories, they left the occupied territories because their bottom line was being impacted by BDS. So the Israeli government is deathly afraid of BDS, which is why they're trying to smear it as anti-Semitic. And again, so you have somebody come out here at the UN and say, I believe in human rights and we should support BDS to those ends. And what's the first thing you do? So he's anti-Semitic, and then he gets fired. He spoke about the 1967 borders. He even emphasized peace and nonviolence. And, people always say, in the U.S. at least, oh, well, Israel has a right to defend itself. Why don't you acknowledge that? Okay, but so do Palestinians then, right? And that was his argument. His argument was, hey, listen, man, we can't glorify violence. We need to believe in peace. We need to believe in nonviolent resistance. But also, just acknowledge, Palestinians have a right to defend themselves. Right? If Israel does, Palestinians do too, right? So I don't even see anything really particularly controversial there. I mean, call me crazy, but that's my interpretation of it. And it's funny how you always hear people screaming and moaning about, oh my God, free speech is under attack. Why are there so many snowflakes out there? Whenever somebody who's on the right gets fired. So, for example, Roseanne was fired. Now, I actually defended her. And I said, hey, totally not cool that you called Valerie Jarrett effectively a monkey on Twitter. And I think it is fair for people to say, that's kind of racist. But at the same time, if we want to be able to defend people on the left when they get fired for a bullshit reason for something they said, we should also acknowledge that perhaps it's not the best idea when people on the right get fired for things they might say that are either wrong or politically incorrect or whatever it might be. So I like to think of myself as one of the few principled voices on this stuff. Now, I get it. It's not literally a First Amendment issue because they're a private corporation and they can hire or fire whoever they want for whatever reason or non-reason. But at the same time, even though it's not the legality of the First Amendment in question here, it is the principle of it. The principle of it is always lean on the side of free speech. And, the only exception should be violence, literally direct calls for violence, libel, slander, and like doxing or something like that. So very few exceptions. But this is the principle of free expression and free speech. What he did is he said something that is literally politically incorrect, that in the United States you're not allowed to say this because they're trying to keep the spectrum of debate way off to the right. Well, what he's doing is he's taking a position here, standing up for Palestinians, that drags that spectrum back to the left, and he's making a perfectly reasonable argument. But as a result of that, they're smearing him and trying to act like he's an anti-Semite and outside of the realm of the reasonable discussion that's to be had. And unfortunately, I don't hear all those free speech voices standing up now that there is a really good, genuine instance of like, oh shit, he's literally getting fired for expressing a political position that's unpopular with the establishment in the United States. And Crickets. I hear crickets. So, no, this is a guy who actually took a stand. He expressed a very reasonable position. He's being maligned and smeared, and on top of that, fired. And what I would have told Marc Lamont Hill is he honestly shouldn't have even apologized for if you interpreted it wrong, I'm sorry. No, you shouldn't have even done that, Mark, because that is going to be used as further evidence that, of course, you did say something wrong when it's not. But that's how it's going to be interpreted. People are going to go, see, he knew he said something wrong. That's why he apologized. Obviously, you don't agree with Hamas. I mean, come on, seriously? That's the argument? Because he said from the river to the sea. But he gave you the rest of his detailed plan in there, and none of it had anything to do with hating Jews or totally destroying Israel. So, he took a stand, and as a result of that, he lost his job, and there aren't nearly enough people speaking out in solidarity with him. And they should be. He's one of the few voices on CNN that from time to time made sense. So it's a shame to see him fired. CNN should immediately hire him back, and they should apologize.